And so all the rest of the cells of the body will make the 36 ATP because these are only worth 4 ATP total. They've got to get through somehow, and they lose some of their energy passing through into the electron transport chain. Now that's if there's oxygen present. So oxygen is drawing electrons through, keeps drawing electrons through. You get this, let's look at oxygen. You got lone pair electrons, then you got all these, all these excess electrons being attracted to it because it's so electronegative. These hydrogen ions are just going to automatically bond to it. So you've got H2O. What have you made? Water. So hydrogen ions attracted to the oxygen that has excess electrons, you're going to make water. This is metabolic water. It's made at the end of a metabolic pathway. Once this oxygen becomes water, it's water forever. So it doesn't matter how you're going to get rid of that. You can sweat, you can urinate, you can spit, you can cry, whatever. Once this oxygen becomes water, it's water. You can't take this water molecule and split it up and get more oxygen. The sun does that during photolysis, but we can't. So that's why we got to continually inhale, bringing more oxygen in for this electron transport chain. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain of cellular respiration. Test question. So what happens if there is no oxygen in there? So none of that's going to happen. We got to back up to what? I said I would talk about it. What would happen to the pyruvate if no oxygen's present? So none of this is going to happen. All you're going to get is your 2 net substrate level phosphorylation from glycolysis. Because wasn't the end of glycolysis, you had the 2 pyruvates and you had the 2 net substrate level phosphorylations. ATPs, and then you had the NADHs. Well, if there's no oxygen present, this pyruvate will fermentate and make lactic acid. When grapes fermentate, they undergo what's called alcoholic fermentation, making us what? Wine, yeah. So plants and yeast, those can do alcoholic fermentation, and that's an anaerobic process, doesn't need oxygen. So we, animal cells, will produce this lactic acid or undergo lactic acid fermentation. So the pyruvate, during glycolysis, pyruvate's made, lactic acid's made, you're getting this 2 net ATP. Not very much energy, not very efficient. In fact, it's hypothesized that this lactic acid buildup causes Charlie horses and cramps, and you have to have a reverse of the amount of oxygen you bring in to take this back to pyruvic acid, and that's called oxygen debt. The amount of oxygen needed to reverse lactic acid buildup is oxygen debt. And if you do have a cramp in that calf and you stop and you're breathing in and you're rubbing that calf, you're rubbing the excess oxygen back into it, you are bringing the oxygen back into that cell, reversing lactic acid buildup back to pyruvate, and then you continue with cellular respiration, that oxidative phosphorylation. So oxygen debt, the amount of oxygen needed to reverse lactic acid buildup. And again, this is an anaerobic process. No oxygen's present. We do have 2 other things to talk about, because what have we been talking about? Glucose is the monomer to what? Glucose is the monomer to carbohydrates, one of those macromolecules. We have 4 macromolecules. Do you remember what they are? 4 biological molecules, the carbohydrates. Yep, proteins, lipids. These are all nutritional macromolecules. And then we have our nucleic acid, DNA and RNA. But we're going to refer to these. We just talked about the carbohydrates, the monomer to carbohydrates. Glucose is one of them. We just talked about this, so we don't need to talk about it. We only have about 12 hours supply of that in our body. When that's gone, our body needs to revert to these, break them down. What are the monomers to proteins?
Amino acids.
How many?
20.
We have 20 different amino acids. So the body will take the proteins, break them down, hydrolyze them into the amino acids, and then catabolize the amino acids. This is called deamination. Deaminate, to take the amine group off, that NH2, to deaminate it, and then that becomes a waste product. Whatever is left, the body will catabolize, and it depends on which of the 20 amino acids it is. It can either go right in as be converted to pyruvic acid, it can go right in and be converted to acetyl group, or it can go right into the citric acid cycle. You don't need any oxygen driven process to run your protein catabolism. So you can be a couch potato and sitting there all night long watching TV, and if you run out of glucose, your body's going to start burning this, deaminate, and you're going to start losing muscle mass. The only way to get rid of this is to be aerobically working, and what's called beta oxidation. Your body will combust your lipids. And if we think about our lipids, we have the triglycerides, the phospholipids, all that group of lipids. The triglycerides, your fats and oils, are made up of a 3-carbon glycerol, and then the fatty acid tails, the 3 fatty acid tails. The 3-carbon glycerol will be converted to pyruvic acid. And then your long chain of fatty acids, the 2-carbon, or the long chains of carbons and hydrogens, those get broken down into 2-carbon chunks. And these 2-carbon chunks, and these fatty acids the fatty acid tails in triglycerides can be 18, 20, 22 carbons long. So you've got all of these 2-carbon chunks that are being catabolized, and if a fatty acid tail is 20 carbons long, you've got 10 2-carbon chunks that can go right into the react with acetyl-CoA, making that acetyl coenzyme A going right into the Krebs cycle. This is why your lipids have more energy per pound than glucose. Glucose only made 36 to 38 ATP when it was combusted. This, depending on how many chains are in that fatty acid tail, how many ATPs can be produced, whether it's 18, 20, or 22 long. So this can go right into that citric acid cycle, making all kinds of NADH and substrate level ATPs. So for the exam, you need to know that protein catabolism is called deamination, and that lipid catabolism is beta oxidation. This is a very aerobic process, so you need to be up and moving about for your lipids to be combusted. In other words, take the steps, not the elevator. Take the elevator, this is what you're going to be burning. Take the steps, this is what you'll be burning. So get off your butt and move and burn these. And that's all I have for this chapter.
Perfect, because we got 30 seconds left to tape.